My name is Audrey Parker. I'm 28 years old, and until a few months ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage. Ethan and I met when I was 24. He was the kind of man who could make a crowded room feel like it revolved around him. He had this easy smile, that kind that made strangers trust him instantly, and a voice that could turn the most ordinary story into something worth leaning in for. I was quieter, more deliberate. Where he was fire, I was water. Where he rushed ahead, I measured my steps. Somehow it felt like we balanced each other. We married 2 years later, in late September, under a canopy of golden leaves. It was a small ceremony. Just family, a few close friends, and Claire, my best friend since college, standing beside me as my maid of honor. I remember looking at Ethan during our vows and thinking, this is it. This is my forever. The first couple of years were everything I'd hoped for. We rented a small apartment with creaky wooden floors and a balcony just big enough for 2 chairs. Sunday mornings were for coffee in the farmer's market. Evenings were for cooking together, or more often, me cooking while Ethan told me about his day, his dreams, his plans for the future. I worked as a marketing manager at a mid-sized firm, and Ethan was building his own consulting business. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that felt like enough. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. It started with little shifts. His phone, once left carelessly on the coffee table, was now always face down. He began taking calls on the balcony, his voice low, his back turned. He started coming home later, sometimes missing dinner entirely. When I asked, he'd smile and say, "Clients are demanding, you know how it is." I wanted to believe him. I told myself every marriage has busy seasons, and this was just ours. Then came the night that changed everything. I was folding laundry in the living room when his phone lit up on the counter. I didn't mean to look, but the preview was impossible to ignore. Last night was perfect. I can still taste the mint on your... My hands froze mid-fold. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. The message was from Claire. Claire, my best friend. The woman who had stood beside me in a pale blue dress, holding my bouquet, smiling as I promised Ethan my life. The woman who had cried with me over breakups, celebrated my promotions, and once stayed on our couch for a month after her own relationship ended. I didn't confront him that night. Instead, I smiled when he came home, served him dinner, and listened to him talk about his client meeting. Inside, something in me shifted. I knew I needed to be careful. I needed to be smart. Over the next week, I watched him more closely. The way he dressed a little sharper, the way his cologne lingered longer, the way he hummed under his breath when texting. I didn't need more proof, but I wanted it. And when I got it, I knew exactly what I would do. It came 2 nights later. He left his iPad on the coffee table, open to a message thread with Claire. Their words weren't poetic. They were practical. Hotel bookings, dinner reservations, jokes about me, about how she's too proud to ever leave and how she'll never see it coming. There was even a selfie of them in an elevator mirror, his hand on her waist, her smile smug. I closed the iPad gently and set it back where I found it. My hands were steady, my breathing was calm. I'd learned a long time ago that when someone betrays you, the most powerful thing you can do is not let them see you break. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Renee was recommended by a colleague. Sharp, discreet, and, as my friend put it, the kind of woman who can dismantle a man's life without raising her voice. We met in her office, a bright space with a single plant in the corner and a view of the city. She didn't ask for the whole story. She just asked, "What do you want to protect?" I said, "The house." We'd bought it last year, a 2-bedroom on a quiet street lined with maple trees. The deed was in my name. Better credit score, smoother approval, Ethan had said. At the time, it felt like a formality. Now it felt like a lifeline. My savings, I added. The account my grandmother had started for me when I was a child. the one I'd added to slowly over the years. And then, after a pause, my time. Renee smiled faintly. She said, "I can help with the first two. The third, that's yours to take." We made a plan. Quiet steps. No confrontation yet. I moved important documents to a safe place, opened a new bank account in my name only, and began looking for a small apartment across town. I didn't want a scene. I wanted a clean break. At home, I played the part. I cooked his favorite meals. I asked about his day. I laughed at his jokes. And every night, I watched him walk out the door to meet a client, knowing exactly where he was going. I wasn't waiting for him to change. I was waiting for the right moment to leave, and to make sure that when I did, he'd have nothing left to stand on.
Betrayal doesn't just break you, it rewires you. It teaches you to see patterns you once ignored. After meeting Renee, I became someone else. Outwardly, I was still Audrey, the wife who smiled at dinner parties, who asked her husband about his day, who laughed at his stories. But inside, I was a strategist. Every word I spoke, every glance I gave was calculated. The first step was proof. Not because I needed it for myself, I already knew, but because I wanted to make sure that when the time came, Ethan couldn't twist the story. I started small, a discreet voice recorder in the living room, another in the car. I synced his iPad to my cloud account. I didn't snoop every day. I let the data collect quietly, like rain filling a jar. Within a week, I had enough to make even the most sympathetic judge raise an eyebrow. Texts arranging hotel stays, photos of them together, some careless selfies, some taken by strangers they'd asked. A voice message from Claire, laughing about how she still thinks we're just friends. I didn't cry when I heard it. I didn't even feel anger, just a cold, steady focus. The second step was financial positioning. Renee had warned me, if he senses you're leaving, he'll try to drain whatever he can. So I moved quietly. I transferred my savings into the new account. I rerouted my paycheck. I even began selling a few valuable items online. Not the obvious ones, but things he wouldn't notice missing. A designer handbag from years ago, a watch I never wore. At home, Ethan was happy. Happier than he'd been in months. He thought he was winning. He thought I was oblivious. That was fine. Let him think that. One evening, he came home with a bottle of wine and takeout from my favorite Thai place. "Thought we could have a date night," he said, smiling like the man I married. I smiled back, poured the wine, and listened to him talk about a new client who was demanding but worth it. I even reached across the table and touched his hand. Inside, I was thinking about the email I had sent that morning to the hotel where he and Claire liked to meet. A polite request for a copy of all receipts under his name for the past 3 months, for tax purposes. They'd sent them within hours. The third step was psychological. I wanted him comfortable, unguarded, so I gave him space. I stopped asking where he was going. I encouraged his late nights. I even suggested he take a weekend trip to clear his head. He took the bait instantly. That weekend, I visited my new apartment. It was small, just 1 bedroom, a narrow kitchen, and a balcony overlooking a quiet street, but it felt like mine. I brought over a few boxes, mostly clothes and personal items. I left the furniture for later. By Sunday night, I had everything I needed: proof, money, and a place to go. All that was left was timing. And then fate handed me the perfect opportunity. Ethan had been planning a business dinner for weeks, the kind where he'd dress in his sharpest suit and come home smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. That afternoon, I got a text from Claire. "Can't wait for tonight. Wear that tie I like." She'd sent it to me by mistake. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I smiled. That evening, I dressed carefully, not for him, but for me. A simple black dress, hair pulled back, no jewelry except my wedding ring. I set the dining table for two, lit candles, and opened a bottle of wine. When Ethan came downstairs, surprised to see me ready, I said, "I thought we could eat before your meeting." He hesitated, then sat. We made small talk. He ate quickly, glancing at the clock. And then, just as he was about to leave, I slid an envelope across the table. "What's this?" he asked. "Open it." Inside were printed copies of the hotel receipts, screenshots of his messages with Claire, and a photo of them together in that elevator. His face drained of color. "Audrey, I hold up a hand. Don't. I'm not here for explanations. I'm here to tell you that this," I gestured between us, "is over. The papers are ready. The lawyer will contact you tomorrow." He tried to speak again, but I stood, walked to the door, and opened it. "You should go. She's waiting." For a moment, he just stared at me. Then he left. I didn't cry. I didn't watch him drive away. I poured myself another glass of wine, blew out the candles, and began packing the last of my things.
Some endings are loud. Mine was silent, and that's what made it lethal. The morning after I handed Ethan the envelope, the house felt lighter. Not because the air had changed, but because I had. I woke up early, made coffee, and sat by the window watching the maple leaves drift down. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for his footsteps, his excuses, his lies. By noon, Renee had already emailed me. "He's been served. Expect pushback." Pushback came quickly. Ethan called, texted, even showed up at my office. He tried every tactic: anger, guilt, charm. He said Claire meant nothing. He said I was overreacting. He said we could work through this. I listened, but I didn't respond. Silence, I'd learned, is more powerful than any argument. Claire, on the other hand, stayed quiet. No calls, no texts. I imagined she was waiting for Ethan to handle it. That was fine. I wasn't done with her yet. The divorce moved fast. Renee was surgical. Every asset in my name stayed mine. Every joint account was frozen before he could touch it. The house, the savings, even the car. All mine. Ethan walked away with little more than his clothes and his pride, and even that was fraying. But revenge for me wasn't about taking things away. It was about making sure they understood the cost of what they'd done. 2 weeks after the papers were signed, I sent Claire a message. "Lunch? Just us. 1 hour, neutral place." She agreed. We met at a small cafe downtown. She looked nervous, but tried to hide it behind a bright smile. "Audrey, I held up a hand. "Don't. I'm not here for apologies." She frowned. "Then why?" I slid a small USB drive across the table. "This is everything. The texts, the photos, the receipts. I've made copies, of course, but this one's for you." She stared at it. "Why would you give me this?" "Because," I said, leaning in, "I know you've been applying for that executive position at the firm, the one with the strict morality clause. I'm not going to send this to them yet, but I want you to know I could, anytime." Her face went pale. "You wouldn't." I smiled. "I would, and I will if you ever cross my path again." I stood, left money for my coffee, and walked out. I didn't look back. Ethan's downfall came more quietly. His clients began to disappear. Some because they'd heard whispers, others because Renee had quietly tipped off a few about his creative accounting. Within 3 months, his business was gone. He moved into a small apartment on the edge of town. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that Claire had left him too. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I simply moved on. My new apartment became a sanctuary. I filled it with plants, books, and sunlight. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. I took weekend trips alone, learned to cook dishes I'd never tried,
and even adopted a rescue cat named Willow. One evening, months later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Ethan. It was short. Just one line. You destroyed me. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. Not out of sentiment, but as a reminder, not of him, but of me, of what I was capable of when pushed to the edge. Because here's the truth. I didn't destroy him. He destroyed himself. I just made sure he couldn't rebuild on the ruins of my life. People think revenge is about rage. It's not. It's about clarity, about knowing exactly what someone took from you and making sure they never take it from anyone else again.